Hello and welcome to another Album of Record podcast. I'm Craig, joined as always by Andrew. It is a furnace in Ohio and probably where you are as well. How's it going, Andrew?
I'm a little sad today. The NBA season is over, and we've still got a couple months till football. So this is just kind of a dead sports period for me. But it's other than that, it's going okay.
July 4th is around the corner. We can celebrate with lots of fireworks and great patio music.
Yeah, I really do view the 4th as like also like the sort of like the 2-minute warning for football, like because camps usually start, in July. So,
Yeah.
that's when you kind of know you're at least getting close to it. And, we'll have NBA draft, free agency, all that jazz. So there'll be things to get us through, and we'll have lots of good music to discuss, I'm sure, as well. So
Yep. Well, I kicked off the summer concert season this past Saturday. Spend a lot of time in the summer up in Chautauqua, New York. It's a lake community. It has a music venue called the Amphitheater at Chautauqua, and they kicked off the season with Counting Crows, which I've seen. I think I've figured out that this is the 6th or 7th time I've seen Counting Crows over the years, but most of that was all in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
You've never seen them?
I've never seen them. Nope.
Are you even a fan?
Well, I love August and everything after. I loved Recovering the Satellites, but that was really about as far as I went. After that, I liked their live album a lot.
Yeah,
Across the Wire, really liked that a lot. But that was really, I forget which album came after that. If it was what was the one? Was it the Fishbowl one? Was
this Desert Life?
Yeah. See, like I barely remember even listening to that one. So
I was on board till Hard Candy in 2002. I thought Hard Candy was actually a really good record, but yeah, then I just really punched out because that was in 2002, and then their next record didn't come out until 2008. I had really kind of moved on in my life from Counting Crows and that kind of music to a large degree. But so anyway, I saw them. I know who Counting Crows are these days, and I know who they had become by the very late 90s anyway, where everything was an ad lib from Adam Duritz. You could tell what song they were playing, but none of the choruses, you couldn't sing along anymore because he just didn't seem interested in replicating the record at all. And for a long time I defended it, and I just said, well, it's their art, they can do what they want. I'm at a point now where I guess they can still do what they want, but every Counting Crow show I see or every live performance I hear, it feels like a missed opportunity more than anything else, and it's kind of sad.
Well, I remember the first time listening to Across the Wire, you got some of that. And I realized, it was like, oh, he's singing different vocal melodies. But I remember on that album thinking like, oh, this seems like a kind of a novel thing. Like it was kind of, to me, I thought it was artistry, and so I enjoyed it on that live album. But it did cross my mind. I remember at one point listening to it a couple of years later and going back and listening to it and feeling like, this is really good. Like, it's really cool that he can do this, but it's like, sometimes you're just like, kind of wish he would just sing the vocal melodies that are on the album, because those are really good vocal melodies, So, yeah. So, I definitely have noticed that about them.
So they have gotten better. They've gotten better at this to some degree. It feels like maybe they finally realize that they're in their greatest hits era and that they need to play things so that people can sing along a little bit. But at this point, it's still only the ones where the entire band is singing the chorus. So they played Omaha, and you could understand the chorus because the entire band is singing, and with everybody harmonizing, he has no choice but to follow along.
Yeah.
But like Mr. Jones
taking control, taking it back.
Yeah, Mr. Jones, the choruses are unrecognizable from a melody standpoint. And then it's like he's trying, like he points the mic at the crowd, but if he never sings the vocal melody once, and I know everybody knows the song, but it's, these big rock concerts are kind of like call and response. And you got to do it at least once the right way before you send it to the audience to sing it along, because I don't know. That's just how I feel about it. So I had a few like quips. We talked about it with my friends after the show, and I I've accidentally seen Weezer probably like 4 or 5 times over the last 6 years because they're just at every festival. And
Yeah.
you know why they're at every festival? Because they know how to put on a festival concert. They play the hits. They do all the fan service. And I think Counting Crows need to go to the Weezer school of festival performances. And look, they don't have to do anything. They played a 2,000 cap amphitheater and they're successful. They're playing casinos. They're doing what they want to do, but they're not on all these big festivals, and they could be. And their diehard fans are still into it. They love it exactly how it is. But I can't help but think that it's just a fraction of what it could be, and more enjoyment for more people. That's just kind of the phase I am in my life, especially with legacy bands like this. But I will say it was interesting that when they played the 3 or 4 songs from the new record, which I actually think is pretty decent for a late era Counting Crows record, they played the choruses exactly like the choruses are on the record. He still has the vocal chops. He could do it. He just refuses. And I'm pointing straight at Adam Duritz. I know lead singers get too much of the credit and too much of the blame, but in this case, there's no place else to go.
Yeah. I really need to listen to the new album. I still have not gotten around to that yet, but it's like, I do think it's interesting, like what, their place as a legacy hit band at this point. I mean, it is interesting to compare and contrast them to some of the other ones who are doing that. But I ultimately like Counting Crows, I don't consider like an important band to me personally. They're just a band that I respect and always liked those first 2 albums. But beyond that, they just haven't really stuck with me that much.
There's certainly a moment in time when I was 15 or 16, maybe even 14, because that's when August and Everything After came out, where I would have said that they were absolutely one of my favorite bands. Because, you fall in love with a band because they put out essentially as a perfect record in August and Everything After. They followed up with not a perfect record, but a near perfect record, an almost no skips and Recovering the Satellites. You think like, this is just a rocket ship and I'm enjoying every second of it. And so, yeah, it fell off, but there is a moment in time where I would have said that they were absolutely one of my favorite bands. But I'll finish it with a compliment, by the way, because they did play, the set list included a lot from Recovering the Satellites and August and Everything After. And their new version of Colorblind, which is just a piano ballad on the record, is just Adam Duritz and a piano. It's now a full band arrangement with all these layers and different dynamics, and it really, really works. It's really excellent. So it's not all bad. I'm happy I saw them. I enjoyed the show, but it just left me feeling like it could have been so much better. I could have enjoyed it so much more. And like I said, if I hadn't had that proximity to the show, probably wouldn't consider buying a ticket to the next Counting Crows show unless, again, they're playing a couple blocks from my house.
There you go.
So that's my story. I'm looking forward. This is a phenomenal Chautauqua season, though. They've got OAR. I'm not a huge OAR fan, but that's a big get. It'll be a great show. And then kind of towards the end of the season, Avett Brothers, which I've never seen Avett Brothers live. I'm a middling fan. I like their stuff. I've never become a diehard, but I know their live shows are just epic and kind of, I don't know if they're world renowned, but they are a renowned live band.
Yeah.
If you're ever going to fall in love with the Avett Brothers, it's probably because you've seen them live.
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right. So we got some new records you and I wanted to talk about. First and foremost, problematic band name. The record called It's a Beautiful Day, What a Beautiful Day by Skinhead.
Yeah.
I'll let you introduce this one.
Sure. So this is a band I had never heard of prior to this weekend. And I woke up Saturday morning and I was just scrolling through my Instagram stories as one does. And I came across Taylor Young's story, and he had posted the like promotional post that their record label did for this album. And it was playing a clip of the song. And I was like, wow, this is actually really good. And, if Taylor Young is promoting it, I was like, does that mean he had something to do with this? And if Taylor Young has something to do with an album, I want to know about it. So,
and reminder, Taylor is from
Taylor Young he's played in so many hardcore bands. He was Nails, Twitching Tongues, God's Hate.
And he's the Hard Lore podcast, right?
It's his brother. His brother.
Okay.
So his brother Colin is the host of Hard Lore, and Colin was the singer in Twitching Tongues. But Taylor has played guitar, drums, I mean, everything. He's an incredible musician, but he's perhaps an even better producer. He has produced so many influential hardcore albums and punk albums over the years. He had a recording studio called The Pit that he would record at his house. Tons of bands would go in, including like bands that we love, you know, Military Gun. He did their album. He's done everything Drain has done. Just so many incredible sounding albums that he's done. And he got actually evicted from, I think the place where the Pit was got sold, and I think the new owners wanted to use it for something else. So he's now set up in a new studio. But anyways, so I looked it up, and sure enough, he produced this album, and I believe he even plays on this album as well. In the notes, there's not a lot of information I was able to find about this artist, so I don't know a whole lot about it, but I pulled it up then on Spotify, listened to it. After one listen, I went to that website and ordered it on vinyl. That's how much I loved this album. This is not, I would not consider this a hardcore band or album. I would consider this a punk album.
Because, let me interrupt for a second, because the Stereo Gum article on this was pretty entertaining, and I'm just going to read straight from it. It was by, let's see who wrote, Tom Brehan wrote it. Of course,
it's Tom. Had to be Tom.
And it starts, there's this guy named Skull, right? That's what everyone calls him. He played drums in hardcore bands like Black My Heart and Criminal Instinct. But more important than that, he's a true larger-than-life character. He's one of these garrulous, I've never pronounced that word. I've only ever read it. Garrulous, charismatic, slightly scary guys that you sometimes meet if you go enough underground shows.
Okay.
And so it's just like this guy who's part myth, part legend, part real person.
Yeah. Well, you get a lot of that in punk and hardcore, so that kind of makes sense. Like, so I call this a punk band in the sense that, like, you know, the guitars are more, the rhythm guitars specifically are more punk than hardcore, I would say. But then they have these lead guitars that, to me, remind me so much of like Drug Church. You know, Drug Church is built very much a similar way, although I think that their rhythm guitar, a lot of those riffs feel more hardcore to me than punk. But, you know, you got the rhythm guitar and then just this incredible lead guitarist adding these awesome melodies on top. And then you've got the howling, barking singer in Drug Church. And I said to me, Skinhead was like Drug Church infused with Fucked Up. The vocals remind me a lot of Damien from Fucked Up. He's got that. He's not singing. He's absolutely barking these vocals, but he does it in such a rhythmic way that melds with the music perfectly. And it's actually a unique skill. Like, you don't notice it unless you like really think about it, but like, a lot of these guys, and I don't have a problem with this isn't a negative, but a lot of the guys, you know, just kind of like just scream in a similar cadence on a lot of their songs. Whereas, you know, what Damien from Fucked Up does and what Skull from Skinhead do is they're like rhythmically aligning with what these songs are doing, which gives it a little bit more of propulsion to. But for me, the highlight of this really is just the lead guitar rhythms, melodies. There is so much melody in this music that's not coming from the vocals. And that's where it's cool that it flips that typical formula of a singer carrying a lot of the melody. But in this band, it's the lead guitars that are carrying a lot of the melody. It's only 22 minutes long. It's an absolute blast from beginning to end. It doesn't take long to check out if you want to check it out, but it is such a fun listen. It's just undeniably, it's great if you love punk music. I think if you don't like punk music, this isn't probably going to be for you, but I think there are even things that non-punk music could appreciate about these guitars.
Yeah, I liked it. It's not really up my alley in terms of genre or style, but I liked it. It doesn't sound anything like Prince Daddy, but it kind of like, that's what the itch it scratched to some degree. There's more complexity and more layers and maybe some electronic sounds in Prince Daddy and the Hyena, but yeah. Something about the melody in the guitars and there was just some. Drug Church is perfect, but if I had to pick a second one that it just recalled for me, it was that. Yeah. And so I really enjoyed it. I didn't know if I was allowed to enjoy some of the lyrics. I hope a lot of it's tongue in cheek.
I'm pretty sure. So just knowing like Taylor Young's politics and all that, like, I'm pretty sure that this is all tongue in cheek.
I
And
think so
like
too.
the lyrics are like they're they're kind of funny in a way, in a very dark humor way. The opening song is called 45, and he's like he's say like hopefully you're dead by 45, but the 45 is 0.45, like 45 millimeter, so it's like all these like tongue-in-cheek references.
Well, and
I
of
don't
course,
know.
there's kill yourself, a total fucking cleanse. I hope they cancel your funeral because no one attends.
Yeah,
Like,
like,
there's a joke in there.
yeah.
Is it funny? I don't know, but it's dark humor.
Yeah, yeah. And so I mean, there's plenty of stuff in there like that is like not even dark, but just funny and observational in a weird way. I really enjoy it. I just think that this is actually one of my favorite albums of the year. For me, I liked it. I like it that much. So worth checking out if you like punk music, if you can tolerate some growling, barking. I'd say barking more than growling. It's more barking,
It's
but
just funny because like 9 songs, 22 minutes, it counts as a record, but it's shorter
yeah,
than a lot of EPs.
I know.
Punk rock, baby.
Yeah, but like it's not like a lot of like 22-minute punk albums have like 16 or 17 songs, like most
Yeah.
of them are a minute. Like these are like legit songs. These are 2 minute. I think there's even a couple songs over 3 minutes. So they're like these are songs. Like there's some
I agree.
songcraft going on here. This is not just for show. And I think that's just another thing that I appreciate about it.
All right, next up, we've got Hotline TNT, Raspberry Moon. This one's gotten a fair amount of pub.
Yeah.
Pitchfork gave it a 7.9. I know, I'm almost positive I read something about it on Stereo Gum as well. This is just one of those bands that is not widely known, but they're widely known in the niche circles.
Yes.
And so their new record came out, and I might have skipped it, except you told me I should listen to it. And I did listen to their last record. I think it was called Cartwheel.
Cartwheel, yep.
And
Which
it
I gave you a hard time about you not talking to me about that album.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't notable for me. It, and we'll talk about this eventually, but Hotline TNT is kind of known to be a shoegaze band, and I always considered myself a shoegaze fan because I liked Hum, but the older I get and the more I learn about shoegaze, the more I feel like maybe I was more into Hum, shoegaze that sounded like grunge, which is what Hum was on their first record, and then they got a little bit more indie rock after that. Sure, they had the big guitars and the layers, and that was one of the loudest shows I ever went to, where they had 3 guitarists with 3 full stacks on stage.
Mm-hmm.
That's shoegaze. But anyway, the true shoegaze, like what Hotline TNT was on their last record, it just felt like I'm so vocally driven, and they buried a lot of the vocals in the last record, is the way I felt.
Yeah.
And I listened to this one, and it was totally not that. More of the pop rings out, and I don't know what made this notable for you.
Yeah, so I'll address a couple things, and I'll hold off on the shoegaze discussion for a second because I do want to get a little bit more deep into that. But so I loved Cartwheel, really loved that album, and then I kind of forgot about it. It was one of those ones like I listened to it a ton when it came out, and I was all about that album. But then over the years, you just forget things these days. Like there's just so much music, and some things just that you really love fall through the cracks. So when I saw that they had a new album coming out, I actually managed to avoid listening to any of the advanced singles. And I got to do my first listen of the album completely blind the day it came out. And I too was just blown away by the vocals. But what stood out to me on this one too was not only are the vocals more in front, but the vocals are also like, he's writing some hooks with the vocals on this album. I compare some of these vocal melodies remind me so much of Nathan Williams from Waves, doing that super catchy slacker rock thing that Nathan Williams does. So I really enjoyed that. But in our conversations about shoegaze, I had kind of said I feel like I tend to like pure shoegaze more than you do. I think you tend to like shoegaze as a like influence mixed into something else. You like it when
Yes.
shoegaze butts up with something else, and whether that be Deaf Heaven who does it, whether that be Hum who does it, on and on. There's plenty of examples of it. But what was interesting is as I was listening to it a couple more times, I started to like find myself debating with myself, is this really a shoegaze record? Then I listened to IndieCast, this weekend, and they talked about this Hotline TNT, and both Steven and Ian flat out said they don't consider this a shoegaze album at all. They feel it's just a pure rock album. I don't know if I really agree with that per se, but
and then they talked about why is it so offensive to call a rock band just a rock band anymore?
Right, which is funny. Because it hardly ever happens. But what like really tickled me was like, I was like, we just got done with these discussions about whether Turnstile is a hardcore band and what is hardcore and all that. Now we're doing it with shoegaze too. Like you got the purists.
Well, now after hearing Skinhead, I know for sure that Turnstile is not a hardcore band, so it's fine.
Yeah. But what's funny is like, I feel like a lot of people today view shoegaze maybe a little bit differently than I do. Like my introduction to shoegaze was Starflyer 59. I grew up loving that band. And to me, like that is the bedrock of what I consider shoegaze. Now, all shoegaze essentially probably gets tied back to My Bloody Valentine. I feel like that's sort of the genesis of it. It like explodes out as a subgenre of that. But the reason I was having trouble with it was because I was like, if somebody were to ask me what is shoegaze music, it's a really hard genre to define what it is. But to me, like the essential thing was there had to be this like droning quality carrying the bass line of the song. You had to have that drone, because to me, that's what shoegaze is. It was this idea of this music that like had you almost in a trance where you were looking at your shoes, like you were, your head down, that sort of like having like a gravity to it, like pulling you down to the ground, like just a heaviness that envelops you. And, that's...
and actually to your point, that's probably where my definition comes from, because after I fell in love with Hum, I went back and bought Electra 2000 and I was like, okay, this is shoegaze.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
Yeah. And so forevermore, that was my baseline for shoegaze.
And maybe everybody thinks of shoegaze as whatever the first album is that they really identified as shoegaze. And that's why for me, like it goes back to and I realized saying Starflyer 59, a band that for much of their career has not sounded like anything like what they did on those first couple albums when they were shoegaze, so maybe that's kind of a funny touch point anyways, but like particularly their album Silver, like that's just that in my head is what shoegaze is. And so like I use that as a baseline, and like that first Hotline TNT album I would definitely say was shoegaze. This album, it maybe moves out of that. It just has elements of shoegaze that are still there. Like there is that heaviness, that weight to it, that
guitar sound.
Yes. It's almost like a whine, like not WINE, but WHINE. Yeah, it has like a whiny quality to that droning, like really like muddy almost feel, so that's present still, but the vocals being so much more out in front is what makes it probably not shoegaze, because shoegaze by default tends to be more of a mumbling, like almost like subdued sound to it, that breathy, whispery, like, sort of quality to it, which this album definitely doesn't have. So it's an interesting conversation, but I'll just say this new Hotline TNT album is awesome, and this band deserves all the indie hype that they're getting. And you did touch on it. Like this is, we keep everything in terms of scales. This is not blowing up like Turnstile blew up. This is blowing up in the indie scene, and people who are into, you go to the Indie Head subreddit, you read Stereo Gum, Pitchfork, the people that are digging for music, they know this band, and it's getting a lot of hype and attention. And I think it's well deserved. And it would be nice to see them start like popping up on like some festival lineups and stuff. I think they would be a really good band, capable of putting on a really good show in a festival setting now that they have 2 albums worth of material.
Yeah. But to your point, we're talking about a band with 190,000 monthly listeners, and the biggest song on this new record, granted it's only been out 4 or 5 days, is 346,000 listens. And I assume that was one of the singles as well. Yeah.
Julia's War. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not to negate any of it. It's just to contextualize the scale of this band.
Yeah. Put it in perspective.
Yeah. And that's been a constant theme for us on this podcast, is just that we'll listen to this band and it's the biggest thing in the world. And then you realize like we're standing in a small room, a small crowded room, but a small room with some of the bands we talk about.
And that's what like not to go down another rabbit hole, but that's what like our modern technology and social media and all that, that's what it does. It makes you always feel like the opinions you're surrounded with have so much more weight than they actually do. Like whoever
Bubbles,
coined the
man.
phrase Twitter is not real life, like that just could not be more true. So
Seriously.
when you're talking with when you say like, man, I love this new Hotline TNT album on Twitter, and 20 people respond to you and it gets 40 likes, and you're like, man, this popped off. Like, wow, everybody loves this album. Well, that was 20 people, 40, assuming the 20 people also liked it, that's, 40 people who agree with you. It's not as big as you think it is, but
no.
Anyways.
No, but it's instructive in other parts of your life too. The different, you and I live in a Cleveland sports bubble.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, where the biggest thing in the world, nobody in Philadelphia cares about what happened with this team or that team or whatever else. It's kind of the same thing with our bands.
Yeah.
All right. So you were able to surprise me, shock me, to give me a record from 1995 that if I ever heard of it, I totally forgot it ever existed. If I ever heard the song, their biggest song, I don't remember. The band Self from 1995, their record Subliminal Plastic Motives. What made you want to revisit this, Andrew?
Yeah, well, speaking of bands that I think are larger than life when they really aren't. No. So this is a incredibly important album to me personally. I've never been, like, all jokes aside, I've never been under this illusion that this was a huge band. But I'm surprised you actually don't remember Cannon, the song Cannon. That got tons of 120 minutes airplay. I think it was on Beavis and Butthead. Maybe not. But that song, and like in growing up in Northwest Ohio on Toledo Rock Radio, they played Cannon. It was a huge hit on the radio up there as well. So this is a band that was essentially a solo project of Matt Mahaffey. I think his brother played a little bit on this album, but it's essentially Matt Mahaffey's project. This album, I think, is one of the coolest sounding albums ever. I love the eclectic nature of this album, and we'll get into talking about that a little bit.
Well, no, let's start there, because I listened to it probably 3 or 4 times over the weekend just to get ready for this. And it sounds exactly like 1995 in the best possible way. It's shiny in the spots where it should be shiny. It's muddy in the spots it should be muddy. The vocal style, recording style, production style, it could fit in with 311. It could fit in with any of those really bright sounding alternative rock bands that hit kind of 95 and later.
Yeah, that's spot on. But like the cool thing about this album for me is the production of this album. So if you listen to this album, particularly with headphones, and just listen to the sound effects that he's layering in there, the percussive nature, there's all kinds of sounds that are adding percussiveness to this album. It reminds me of what Trent Reznor did with The Fragile. But the funny thing is, this came out 4 years before The Fragile. Like, this predates The Fragile. Now, these songs do not sound like Nine Inch Nails. Don't get me wrong.
And he recorded this on an analog 16-track machine.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, this is like the definition of just tinkering and putting together a huge sound. And the funny thing is like I was reading one review of it, and they actually said it was like Nine Inch Nails mixed with ELO, which I kind of love that.
That's interesting.
It kind of works. But like, there's elements of so many things that came after it. There's definitely lots of Beck in here, but like Odelay wasn't out yet in 95, right? That wasn't like, that was like 98. So. I think Odelay
I thought it was 96, but whatever.
Either way, it wasn't out yet. But like, you would think, like, if you heard this album today, you might think, oh, this was influenced by Beck, and this predates Odelay. Now, granted, Mellow Gold would have been out because that was early 90s. I also hear I hear a little bit of New Radicals, even like, in terms of like the way these songs are like constructed, and even in the nature of like New Radicals essentially being a one-person project as well, for all intents and purposes.
Well, and it's not a self-serious thing. It's not sad and full of angst the way a lot of the early 90s and the real grunge, but it has a lot of that grunge sound. So I think that's where the Beck stuff comes in. It's like maybe it's in the same sensibility of maybe even like a Bare Naked Ladies, even though they were less electric and more analog and acoustic,
Yeah.
but kind of that same vibe. And that's maybe one of the reasons why I wasn't really drawn to it, because like I like music that's sad or mad, like party music and happy music and things that are in between, tongue in cheek. I'm usually out.
Yeah. Well, but like the thing that's kind of funny about this album though is like there are some dark lyrics on here with
Sure.
happy vocal melodies. Like a song
Yeah.
like So Low, like that has really dark lyrics with a pretty catchy vocal melody on top of it. Like I kind of like even equate a little bit of like Ben Folds 5 a little bit in terms of that ability to have that
Yes, I thought of Ben Folds 5, especially their first record, a number of times when I was listening to this, because there's something about the tonality of his vocals that sounds a little bit like that. And
Yeah.
also just the poppy and punchy way. Because that first Ben Folds record was punchy, you know?
Yes. Yep.
That whereas shoegaze is layers and it's this drone, this one just kind of like pops and bounces. It's almost hip
Yeah.
hop-ish the way it pops.
Yeah, you could make maybe even like a little bit of like Outcast sort of like influence in there a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like and like the thing that's cool about this album though is like there are like crunchy heavy guitars mixed in too. Like he really likes to do things where he'll do like a song might start with this like really heavy guitar part, and all of a sudden the chord or the verse comes in and it just immediately transitions into like this like almost like a happy-go-lucky vocal melody, if you will, and then it goes into like a heavier darker chorus. Like this album is all over the place. Like these songs, very few songs are linear, like from beginning to end. Like these songs have so many intricate parts to them, really interesting bridges, interludes. Like there's just a lot going on this album. And so the reason I wanted to talk about it was because I happened to realize that it was the 30 years anniversary of the album, that it was a 1995 album. But like, I feel like this is an album that clearly has been, I don't even know if you can say it's forgotten, because it was never a big hit. Like I acknowledge that, but like I feel like it's really like held up in a way that you can listen to it today and still appreciate a lot of what they're doing while still sounding inherently 90s. Like when you listen to this, you are transported back to 1995. Like this is that second wave post grunge era of, you know, things that bands were trying to do who weren't a pure grunge band.
You know, another one that I think of is Soul Coughing, because I recently saw them.
Yeah.
And like that, totally different bands, but again, just in terms of that poppy vibe and doing things a little bit different in the post-angst 90s alternative rock arena. But yeah, no, I enjoyed listening to this. I'm kind of surprised that I really didn't know anything about it and that it completely slipped my radar, because usually I'm the one who's bringing up a record to not you, but anybody else in the world, and they're going,
yeah,
I never really even heard of that band.
Yeah. Well, this was me and my friends that I was in a band with in high school. We all just loved this album. So this was just something that we all bonded over, like how much we loved this album. So like I said, for me, it has an outsized importance that maybe doesn't resonate quite as much with everybody else. But they do have like, it's kind of interesting because, you know, they had a song on this called Sophomore Jinx, which talks about writing your sophomore album, which is funny because this is their first album.
Yeah.
This is not their sophomore album. But then they kind of did disappear, and there is a little bit of tragedy with this. Matt Mahaffey's brother, Mike, passed away. And I remember like it kind of, then they like just kind of disappeared. And, you know, just I also know that I let somebody on my floor my freshman year of college, I let them borrow my CD. And as happens in college, I never got it back. Well, this was out of print for a long time too. I couldn't find it on CD. And so
Did that bother you? Were you annoyed by that?
Oh God. And I went so long without being able to listen to this album. And because like you would think, oh, well, you could just download it. Well, guess what? This was not an album that people tended to have on their listservs, right? Like, because again, it was not a very popular album. And I remember the day that I found this on Spotify and got to listen to it for the first time in a long time. And I was so like just overjoyed getting to listen to this again. But they, in doing some research about this, things I didn't know was going on, they would do every year to commemorate Mike Mahaffey's passing. They would do like a show in their hometown of somewhere in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And
Murfreesboro.
They would play. Where was it?
Murfreesboro.
Oh, Murfreesboro. Is that how you pronounce Murfrees? Is that Murfreesboro?
I think so.
I've never known how you pronounce it. I've never known how you pronounce that. Anyways, but yeah, so like they would play an anniversary show every year, I guess, and that was kind of it. But they did eventually put out a couple more albums, and you know, they were good. They were, you know, I appreciated them, but you remove that spark of nostalgia, I suppose, or maybe it was just over time. I don't know. They didn't have that same hook for me that this album did. But like this is an album I listen to pretty routinely. Like I do not go too terribly long these days without listening to this album. I don't know. There's just something about that blending of just different elements and genres. And like I said, the layering of the textures and just really listening to the production of what he was doing on this album is, to me, it's just so unique. And I just don't think there's many albums that really sound like this. And so I thought it would be fun to just kind of talk about it. And it was especially cool finding out that you didn't have any frame of reference for this band. Like I've told a few people about this band, and I'll play Canon for them and they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember this song. So Canon is probably one of the more straightforward songs on this album. It doesn't deviate too much from what it is. It just starts out with the just a subdued little palm muted verse, and then hits you with the heavy chorus, which is a very 90s, almost a Nirvana-esque song, maybe in some ways. But so yeah. I know a lot of people have heard of this, but it was really like, I was really excited when I found out that you didn't have any frame of reference for this, because I was just really excited to see what you would think. I had no idea what you would think of this album, not having any of the background that I have with this album.
Well, and it's such an interesting time in alternative rock too. I just pulled up the list, not the list, but a list of kind of the most influential records from 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily for you and me personally, like Pulp had a record, Your Boys Oasis, of course, What's the Story, Morning Glory, but also like this was probably peak Bjork, where she really popped off. Blur, The Chemical Brothers, Elastica, Garbage. Like the sound was changing. The sound was definitely changing from those early days of the angst-driven grunge.
I always think this period is interesting. The mid to late 90s, before the boy bands and pop take over, like it was really an interesting time, which I appreciate a lot more today than I did in that time. And that time,
me too.
I still wanted my alternative, right? Like I wanted the heaviness, the edginess, the angstiness. I still wanted that. But like today, like I really think it's cool to reflect on like a lot of these bands that exist, like a lot of those bands that you mentioned, maybe not Bjork so much, but you know, certainly like a band like Garbage or Elastica, like they still had those grunge elements were there. They're undeniably there, but they took that influence and were putting a more approachable spin to it. I wouldn't call Garbage a happy band. Like it wasn't a happiness, but it was a more approachable spin to it. And I think this album, again, while it was not a huge success then, I do think it was like a precursor to a lot of that stuff that was coming down later in the 90s, that I think he was doing something that would catch on. And, you know, I'm in no way saying he influenced that, but I just think it's an album that is in some ways a little bit before its time. I think it would have been interesting if this album would have come out in 1998 instead of 95, for example. Yeah. Would people have been a little bit more ready for that sound? And like, I think in a post Odelay world, people would have been like, I always think of Odelay as just such this huge like vibe shift for people that like sort of like we're starting to look at music in a little bit just a little bit of a catchier way. They wanted a little bit more hooks in their music, and Beck was the one. That's like that Odelay album. I just remember that being like feeling like something was really shifting with that, with the success of that album.
No, I agree with that. I think we should probably finish with a new record announcement that came out today, along with another single from The World is a Beautiful Place and I Am No Longer Afraid to Die. We did talk about, I think we talked about Beware the Centrist on the podcast.
We did
because
indeed.
that one came out and it's 1 minute and 44 seconds and it just is a hard, heavy song with lots of screaming, including the first screaming by vocalist Katie Dvorak, who also plays keys, synthesizer, whatever
Yep.
keyboards she plays. There are many on the rack there. So they released another new song today called Se Sufre Pero Se Goza, which I have no idea what that means, but it's another super heavy song. And it joins a song that they released probably 6 months ago that I didn't know was going to be part of a forthcoming album called Auguries of Guilt. And Auguries of Guilt sounds like it could have been on their last record, Illusory Walls from 2021. I love that song, but I also love these two new songs. And so now we've got a track list. We know it's going to be 11 songs. It comes out on August 22nd. So did you listen to the new song?
I was so busy today. I didn't get a chance to listen to the song, but I will say I'm very excited to hear you say that it's another like heavier one, because like I think we talked about this when we talked about the Beware the Centrist. Like I kind of like this idea. This is not a band that is like never done this before. Like they've delved into heavier stuff, but like I'm like really intrigued by the prospects of them really leaning into it right now. I think like, not that I think it's going to sound like it, but in my head, I sort of immediately like think about like what Foxing did with their last album, where they really took a thing that was not unnatural to them to go heavy. Like Foxing has always been capable of going heavy, but they like really pushed it, really leaned into it and pressed on that button while still having things that are quintessentially Foxing. But so I'm very like intrigued to see if that's what they're doing with this album based on these first singles. But it's always exciting to see a band like this when you know that they have a new album, because this is just a band that you never quite know what they're going to sound like, and you don't really know what you're in store for. And so that's always part of the excitement with them.
Well, and this is one of the most unique bands in these indie circles. Truly is. I'm checking again. There's one single original member, and it's
really?
But it's had a similar lineup since 2012 or 2013. But yeah, really the original band was formed in 2009. By 2011, they added a couple of these people who have remained, but it's almost a band of Theseus.
Almost. Damn close.
So when you compare anything that they've done in the previous years, it's incomparable. It just doesn't even make sense to a certain point. So I'm really just comparing it to Illusory Walls, because it's kind of the next chapter after that record, which was probably, I don't remember if it was my favorite record of that year, but it was definitely in the top 5. I still listen to that record all the time. And to get a song like Auguries of Guilt, which would fit exactly into that, but then 2 new songs that are totally bending the space-time continuum, it just has me super, super excited. But I did want to mention that this new song has a guest vocalist, guest screamer, Brendan Murphy, of a hardcore Canadian band called Counterparts, which I'd never really heard of. But they brought in a ringer to scream.
Yeah,
this,
absolutely.
But it's really, really good.
I'm looking forward to that. Worth pointing out, too, since we're talking about upcoming releases, this album, we're recording this before the album is out, but if you're listening to this, that means it's Friday, and that means there's a new Greet Death album in the world, too. Right? That's this week, isn't it? Or is that next week?
I think so.
I think it's this. I'm positive. It's because it's a June release. It's not a July release. So, yeah. We got a new Greet Death album out in the world.
2 days, 5 hours, 27 minutes, and 37 seconds while we're recording this. I will say
the singles are so good on that. I'm really excited for this album.
And they've only released 3, but I almost feel like it's too many.
Yeah.
So we'll have 9 songs. Man, that band really likes to stretch.
Oh yeah.
Not in a bad way, but yeah, 6-7 minute songs. I'm really looking forward to this one. So we'll probably end up talking about that one next week for sure.
For sure.
So anyway, thank you so much for listening. A little bit shorter episode for us. We're usually an hour and 5 minutes, but
that's all right.
All good.
Yeah. I mean, we said what we had to say.
So as always, you can find everything we do on albumofrecord.com, where we post the episodes. The best place to listen to us is probably YouTube. All the episodes are up there. So we appreciate you checking us out. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the Album of Record podcast.